Good afternoon. It's a great privilege indeed to welcome all of you to this webinar to celebrate the publication of yet another translation from the Sanskrit by someone who's become synonymous with this genre for decades now, Ambassador Adityanayan Shield Haksar. I must say I've had the privilege of being invited by Ambassador Haksar previously to read extracts from his new publications over the years. And it's a real pleasure that in the middle of this pandemic, we have yet another book coming out from him, published by Penguin. And this is a landmark publication, I think. It's Kalidasa's Vikramorvarshiyam, Quest for Urvashi, translated from the Sanskrit to English by Ambassador Haksar, his latest publication. I'm delighted that we have a group of experts, apart from Ambassador Haksar himself, to discuss this particular publication and this translation. And let me introduce you to all of them. Of course, Ambassador Haksar needs absolutely no introduction. He's a well-known translator of Sanskrit classics into English, born in Gwalior in central India. He is a graduate of the Doon School, the Allahabad University, and Oxford University. He's been a career diplomat, serving as an Indian High Commissioner to Kenya and the Seychelles, Minister in the United States, Ambassador to Portugal and Yugoslavia, and he also served as Dean of India's Foreign Service Institute and President of the UN Environment Programme's Governing Council. But I must say, of late, his distinction has been that I think this is his 21st translation to be published from Sanskrit. Of course, he will correct me in case I've got that information wrong, but he has been very prolific and doing yeoman service by translating and making accessible Sanskrit classics to the English-speaking and reading audience. I'm delighted also that we have distinguished panelists who know far more about the subject than I do to discuss this particular publication, this translation. We have Dr. Sudhamahi Raghunathan, former Vice Chancellor of the Jain Vishwabharati University in Rajasthan. We also have Ambassador Amarendra Khatwa, again a distinguished former diplomat, a foreign service officer, former Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, and former Director General of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations. We have Ambassador Bhashati Mukherjee, another distinguished diplomat, former Ambassador of India to the Netherlands, and distinguished also for her work with the European Union. And we have just me to moderate this discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. I think the best thing to do would be for us to first commence by asking Ambassador Haksar to say something about the work, the Vikramorvarshiyam, which is a classic, one of the three plays surviving written by Kalidasa, and also to say something about the nature of the work he has undertaken in translating this great classic into English, a new translation. Ambassador Haksar.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind words and for this gathering this afternoon, which I deeply appreciate. And I'd like to say that this is a good opportunity for all of us and for all the listeners and viewers to know a bit more about the glories and the varieties of our ancient literature and language. Now, so far as this translation is concerned, let me tell you, the first English translation of this play was done at Oxford University over 150 years ago. And the latest was done at the Columbia University just about 40 years ago. In between, there have been several, including several in India, but they are all more or less designed for students to help them prepare for examinations. My translation has just come out, this one. It is a direct translation from the original Sanskrit of the famous poet. And it is meant not just for students or for experts, it's meant for the general reader today. And I have attempted in this translation to make it not only literal and literary, but also to convey in it something of the play's underlying flavor and spirit. Now, some words about this play. Its setting is both earthly and celestial. It's a love story. The hero is human, the heroine is heavenly. Our famous scholar President Radhakrishnan described this play as a blend of the human and the superhuman. The hero of this play is King Pururavas. The heroine is the Apsara, the heavenly nymph Urvashi. Their ancient love story was first described in our culture and civilization in the Rig Veda itself. Then, over succeeding centuries and through many writers, it was embellished and modified in many presentations in different Puranas and other scriptures. Finally, Kalidasa, who lived, you might say, 400 AD or something like that, gave it his own shape, his own dramatic and human form. The story's evolution from the Rig Veda to Kalidasa is a subject which has received a lot of scholarly scrutiny. Here it may be enough to say that while the lover, King Pururavas, is the same, shown the same way throughout, the Vedic heroine, Urvashi, in the Rig Veda, she rejected the lover. But in Kalidasa, she accepted him with a happy and joyous end to the play. Now, some words about Kalidasa himself. He's still the most highly esteemed poet and dramatist in Sanskrit literature to this day. So many people have praised him. I don't want to add words to it, but I will just give you a verse in his praise, which I translated and which is quoted in my introduction to this book. And it is a verse by a famous poet from the Vijayanagar Empire. And my translation says, in the count of ancient poets, Kalidasa does at the first place stay. But for the lack of one comparable, the next place is nameless to this day. So this is the high standing that Kalidasa has. And it has been a great joy for me and a wonderful experience to translate this play. Now, comments upon it, I give to all the gentlemen and ladies who are gathered here, who have seen this play, this book, this translation, and I'll be delighted that through this discussion, more people learn a little more about Kalidasa and his beautiful writing, and that way also a little more about the beauties beautiful glimpses which are there available in Sanskrit literature for people to see even today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Haksar, for that very brief introduction to Vikramorvarshiyam and to your the background of the play. I'd like to turn first to Dr. Sudhamayi Raghunathan, who is not only a former Vice Chancellor of the Jain Vishwabharati University at Rajasthan, but also an author and translator herself. Her books include Rishabhayan, The Story of the First King, The Colors of Desire on the Canvas of Restraint, and From One Birth to Another, Stories from Jain Literature. So may I ask you for your comments, Dr. Raghunathan, and maybe we can also have a bit of a dialogue on this particular translation with Ambassador Haksar.
Thank you so much, Sunil. It's lovely to be here, and I thank IIC and Mr. Haksar for providing this opportunity. But Mr. Haksar amazes me. He provides this.
I think we're having some problems with the connection with Dr. Raghunathan. Perhaps we can try and sort that out. And in the meantime, may I invite Ambassador Amarendra Khatua to speak. He's a very illustrious and learned person from the formerly of the Indian Foreign Service. He's also, like Ambassador Haksar, been Dean of the Foreign Service Institute. He's also been Secretary Special Assignment to the Ministry of External Affairs and has held ambassadorships of various countries. Mr. Khatua, could you please say something about this particular translation? You are also very learned in this field and in the field of culture. And perhaps you could give us some comments on this particular translation and interrogate Ambassador Haksar.
Yeah. Thank you, Sunil. It's such a pleasure to be with Ambassador Aditya Narayan Dharesil Haksar, the legend. I believe he has put tremendous effort to bring classical Sanskrit literature to the common readership in India. Very few have done work like him. The present work we are talking about, Vikramorvarshiyam, this is one of the 3 plays of Kalidasa. Others are Abhigyana Sakuntalam and Malavika Agnimitram. But this translation, which originates from basically Rig Veda, the 95th section called Sutta, that is conversation between Pururavas and Urvashi, when she is leaving him after staying with him for 4 years. It's a special creation of Kalidasa. It has both the nature of flowing from an epic as well as lyricality of Kalidasa, for which he is known in his texts like Raghuvansa, Kumar Sambhava, etc. When I'm talking about this drama, basically the story already Ambassador Haksar has specified. Kalidasa from Rig Veda as well as about 4 Puranas, Vishnu Purana, Matsya Purana and Bhagavata Purana. All these Puranas deal with the story of Pururavas and Urvashi. But Kalidasa has taken different variation, introduced them in such a way that it becomes not only very readable, also it gives a story angle to the whole play. What is the play? It is a 5-act play. In the first play, Urvashi is returning from Mount Kailasa on leaving Rishashringa. Rishashringa is some Rishi Vibhandaka, whom she seduces. And there is a story which goes to Ramayana also, dynasty of Rama. When returning with the Apsaras, they are abducted by Keshin. Pururavas saves them. While saving them, he falls in love with Urvashi. In the flow of the story, how he now goes to capture the heart of Urvashi. He obtains permission from his queen, and Urvashi being the celestial nymph. Again, the story of Urvashi is also very unique. Normally, all the Apsaras are product of Samudra Manthan, but Urvashi is producer of a rishi called Naranarayan. When he was doing tapasya, Indra got worried that he may ask for something like always like they ask for the Indrasan. Indra sends Apsaras to disturb their yoga. Naranarayan hits his Janu, Urvashi comes out. And Urvashi's birth is like that. And Urvashi is so beautiful that everything stops. I think Dr. Raghunathan is back. I should stop, please. Sunit, I'll continue later.
No, please go ahead.
No, it's okay.
We'll come back to that. Dr. Raghunathan, could you please take up where you had left off? Unfortunately, we had some technical problems. And could you also please adjust the camera so that we can see your face? Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
thank
can
you
now?
Yes.
I moved about. Well, I'm fascinated by Mr. Haksar's, how prolific he is. Even before I finish digesting one book, he's got another one there for me to read and enjoy. Vikramorvarshiyam has been a fantastic experience. And apart from saluting him for being able to get a classic which was set in a time so long ago with as Ambassador Khattar was saying, the ambience and the metaphors being so different from what it is today. I was wondering how Mr. Haksar was for contemporary times. And I marvel at that. But I have, as comment, I have two questions. One,
just as Dr. Raghunathan was asking her questions, perhaps we'll come back to those questions a little later. In the meantime, may I introduce and request another participant in our webinar, Ambassador Bhashwati Mukherjee, to please give her point of view. I'm sure you've been through this translation, and maybe you would like to say something about the particular translation or about Vikramorvarshiyam.
But shouldn't Ambassador Katua finish what he was saying, or you would like me to speak?
I think, why don't you speak just now, and then we'll come back to Ambassador Katua as well.
Okay, we'll go back to Amrendra a little later. Thank you, Amrendra. Ambassador Haksar, it is such a great pleasure for me to be here. I have a couple of comments to first make about your book, and then I want to go to the book and I read out a couple of the verses which you've translated, which is so beautiful. First of all, I wanted to say that what you have done is to put on center stage India's intangible cultural heritage, which is very rich and which has been appreciated by Indologists outside India, but unfortunately sometimes not appreciated so much by many people, including the youth in India right now. So you've done something which really needed to be done. Secondly, you have actually, as you said yourself, you've written it for the general public, and it's amazingly readable. The poetry and the flow is exactly what even a person who is not familiar with Sanskrit would be able to understand and appreciate. But more than that, in the lyrical translation that you've done from Sanskrit to English, you have brought to life a classical love story between a mortal and an immortal, which reminded me also of the Greek legends that I used to read when I was in school, and therefore reminded me that there is a connect between ancient India, ancient Greece and the ancient civilizations. There is a civilizational connect, and that's also part of India's soft power. Another thing that your translation reminded me, Ambassador Haksar, was that contrary to colonial historiography, you have depicted the women in Kalidasa's play as strong, with minds of their own, in a position to be able to take important decisions about themselves. And this is very refreshing because there has been a lot of writing done about the decline of the position of women from the Gupta period onwards, etc., etc. So, actually, Kalidasa's play and your translation demonstrates that at least in the period when Kalidasa wrote his play, women had a strong and important role to play in their society. And my final comment before I move to the book itself is that when the British came to India, and despite their translations and their works, which they like to remind us about, the point is that they often questioned our history, our culture, and our civilization, saying that it's not. You had the European positivists who would say, "Where is the proof? How do we know it existed?" And that was particularly so when they would question the great heritage and culture of ancient India. By your translating Kalidas's poem, you have demonstrated that we have a heritage. It's intangible and tangible. This is intangible, but it is real, it can be proved, and it shows the civilizational link that India had at that time and age with comparable Western cultures and civilization like the Greek culture. So, congratulations for that. As far as the play itself is concerned, as I said, I have gone through it in detail. I understood the poetic license of Kalidas when he made it into a happy ending, which I was glad about because women always like romantic and happy endings, and I'm no exception. I was fascinated when I read up on your book about the so-called humble background of Kalidas, the stories that were written, which were told us in school, about how he was actually not so knowledgeable on Sanskrit, how he was self-taught, etc. All this adds to the fascinating background of this man who is the greatest poet of ancient India and whose poem you have translated. And it's not a poem that is that well known, for example, to a Bengali like me, because I am more familiar with Meghduta. Then I must confess to you that I really enjoyed Act 4. And when I read up on Act 4, I saw that there was some criticism by a few of Kalidas who had apparently used Prakriti in some of the phrases rather than pure Sanskrit. Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I have to tell you that some of your most romantic translations are in Act 4. As you know, women are romantic, and your translations really touched a chord in my heart. I'll just read out one because I do hope that our two speakers have come back online, and I can always come back to ask you another question later. But if I'm looking at your Act 4, when the king is hunting for Urvashi, who's been made into a vine because she's entered into this forbidden grove, and when the king says in page 75 of the book, "This is a new cloud that I see, not a dark and armored demon. This indeed is a rainbow, not the bow by an archer drawn. This too is a shower of rain, not a volley of arrows. And that golden streak is lightning, not my darling Urvashi." So beautiful. He's talking about the rain, the rainbows, the thunder, the lightning, and he is looking for the love of his life. And you have translated it from such difficult Kalidasa's Sanskrit, I should know, we studied Sanskrit in school in our times, into such beautiful lyrical English that I was just amazed. And to say that you have actually brought Kalidasa, as you say, into the public domain, so that one day I do hope that in our country we will start again reading our classics and go back to Sanskrit. And I think Dr. Raghunathan is back. So I am so sorry, Dr. Raghunathan, that I've taken up your time. But I do hope that your technical problems are over and we can now hear you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Haksar, for inviting me to this important discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Bharshati. Let's see if Dr. Raghunathan is able to ask her two questions which she had framed before we asked you to intervene. Perhaps as because there are bandwidth issues happening, I think. So if you keep your camera off, maybe we can hear your questions clearly in case there's a problem with the audio. So, Dr. Raghunathan, please, you were poised to ask two questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you. But before I ask the question, this book is called Quest for Urvashi. And this has resulted in my quest for Urvashi. Urvashi is anything beautiful. This beautiful experience has been running away from me more than a couple of times now. So, Dr. Haksar, your title is so prophetic. Well, my question was, you have done so many translations of Kalidasa. Do you ever feel a sense of deja vu or a repetition, because he does a lot of nature and his description of the beautiful woman and the heroic and handsome hero is there in all the books, maybe Raghuvamsham apart, which is a little different perhaps. All the others are similar. Did you ever feel a sense of repetitiveness, or is Kalidasa sparklingly new? Should I ask my second question also, or?
So that Ambassador Haksar can address each of these questions one by one. Yes, please go ahead with your second question.
Yes. May I reply to this question? Firstly, thank you very much, both Dr. Raghunathan and Ambassador Bhaswati, for what you have said. Now, in response to the question which has just been posed, let me say that I have had the good fortune of translating two other Kalidasa works for Penguin Classics. This is the third one. The first, which I translated with the Raghuvamsham, and the second, which I translated, is the Ritu Sambharam. And I have had the experience now of going through a variety of Kalidasa's works, his language, his experiences. Raghuvamsham, which is held in the world of Sanskrit literature as the highest work of Kalidasa, describes the whole dynasty of Raghu. Ramchandra, of course, figures in it. We've all heard about him, so had Kalidasa. But he is not the only one there. He describes earlier rulers and he describes later rulers. Some of them were very great. They did wonderful deeds. Raghu himself was a great general, a great warrior. His father was a wonderful couple, he and his wife, and his son, and Ajab. It's a great love story. And then Dasharath Rama. And then later on, there were kings who were not so good. And Kalidasa describes them also. So it is a story which covers human nature, or you might say human divine nature, in all aspects. Ritu Sambharam, on the other hand, is a wonderful collection of lyrics, lyrical poetry of natural beauty and the effect of natural beauty on human emotions and relations. And it deserves being read. There Kalidasa is speaking about humans, but he is speaking even more about the beauty of the nature, plants, animals, sky, mountains, snow, everything. And in this poem, Vikramorvarshiyam, which we are discussing here, he has built a wonderful story of a love which transgresses the human and the divine. How it met with great complications in between, and how it finally succeeded. At another level, you might say that he is pointing out to the fact that the human search for the divine is not easy, but if you persist, it can lead to great success. So this is what I'd like to tell you about Kalidasa. And these are 3 of his 7 works. And Kalidasa, of course, is held in very high esteem.
Thank you.
Yes.
Before we come to your second question, Dr. Raghunathan, perhaps Ambassador Khatua has been waiting very patiently. We can go to him, and he can continue his comments on the translation and the play itself, perhaps, and Kalidas, and then we'll come back to you for your second question.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Ambassador Khatua.
The 3 books which Ambassador Haksar has translated of Kalidasa, they are all different. What Dr. Raghunathan was talking about repeatedly, Kalidasa specializes in love and separation. And whenever nature comes, he is so poetic that very few in the world can write poetry or drama or epic like him. Description of nature. That is speciality of Kalidasa. Ambassador Haksar's introduction to the book, that could have been longer, because lots of people who read Kalidasa or old Sanskrit texts, they do not know the context, the story, and the history of the author. Therefore, all these are connected in a integrated manner in the texts of Kalidasa. Then second, whenever we are talking about Kalidasa, you see, whenever there is emotional outburst or outflow of human relationship, it comes into poetry. Poetry which is translated Ambassador Haksar in this book are terrific. This expresses longing of Pururavas for Urvashi. It talks about concept of loss, concept of longing and not finding her in the forest where she has turned into a vines. Therefore, my question, let me ask a couple of questions to Ambassador Haksar, that why introduction, while introducing the story, he could not put all this together so that common readers who are enjoying the book will understand more. Because Kalidasa doesn't have many books. Kalidasa has 3 plays, epic poems, 2 lyrics. Plays are Abhigyana Sakuntalam, Malavika Agnimitram, and Vikramorvarshiyam. And then poems are Raghuvansa and Sambhava. And lyrics are Meghaduta and Ritu Sahara. So what I'm saying, if the introduction clarifies this will help the leadership, because many come with these questions, the repetitiveness or linking of the story. This is the first question. And second is, like when he's translating, already he has translated like Meghaduta, I think Kumar Sambhava, and this. I think other 2 also have to be translated because they are also excellent. Is that in the Ambassador Haksar schedule? These are the 2 small questions. Then we'll come back later. Thank you.
Right, Ambassador Haksar, would you like to answer and address the questions raised by Ambassador Khatua?
Well, what I would like to say is, he has raised very profound, but also, it seems to me, very scholarly and academic questions. My own approach is to make an attempt to bring the Kalidasa's works before the general public in a modern setting, in a modern language, to enable them to experience some of the pleasure which those works have always given to readers over many centuries. So I would say that the questions are valid, and what made Kalidasa put his stories and his works out in the way that he did, an answer to that would require, I think, more scholarly, in-depth deliberation, which I don't know whether I am able to do, because my effort was chiefly, to produce this translation in a manner which will bring the beauties of Kalidasa's work and language before the readership of today, so that people can know a little more about this great poet, apart from his name and apart from the name of some of his works. Raghuvansham, Kumarasambhavam, Shankuntala. All people know all these names. What these works contain and what Kalidasa is conveying through these works is something which deserves to be seen both from a scholarly point of view, but also as a general reader, a general public. So that is how I would like to put it.
Would you also like to address the second question which Ambassador Katua asked, which is that you have already translated earlier and published 2 translations from Kalidas, Raghuvansham and Ritusamharam. Do you have any plans to translate any of the other works into English as well, especially the other 2 plays?
Well, the answer to your question is that Penguin, who happen now to be my publishers for the last 2 decades, have been wanting over the years to bring out what they call a complete series of Kalidasa classics. And in this work, the 3 best known of Kalidasa classics, Shakuntala, Meghadutam, Kumarasambhavam, and then also Malvika Agnimitram. These had already been translated by distinguished writers, both Indian and foreign, and brought out in the Penguin Classic series. Then I was approached by Penguin. I was doing other kinds of work. My effort in translation was through translation to bring before the general public such Sanskrit works as are either little known or even completely unknown. That's a totally different subject. I'll be glad to touch upon it. But since Kalidasa was a well-researched and well-known name, I had kept away from doing Kalidasa. But I was approached by Penguin. They said that now we've got 4 Kalidasa works done. Would you do another one for us? So I said, yes, I'll do so. And I then made a selection and I did Raghuvansham. I so much enjoyed doing Raghuvansham that I then asked them to permit me to do the Ritusamharam also. And then I did the Ritusamharam. And then there remained only 1 play of Kalidasa. Kalidasa is now known for 7 works. And after my Raghuvansham and Ritusamharam, 6 of those 7 had been done. And there remained only 1. And then we had a discussion between the publishers and myself. And we said now this last one should be done in order to complete the series. And this is how I came across Vikramorvarshiyam. And having read the text, because when I do my translations, I do them directly from the original. I don't go into other translations or things like that. And having read the text of Vikramorvarshiyam, as I went through it, I discovered the great beauties of this play. And as has been mentioned by one of your panelists, Ambassador Bhaswati, one of the delightful parts of the play Vikramorvarshiyam, in my opinion, the most delightful part of this play is its Act 4. And Act 4 is wonderful, in my opinion, for two reasons. One reason is that it is almost an entire musical, operatic description. The hero is singing, dancing, and asking questions about the heroine, who has meanwhile disappeared, having turned into a creeper mine. The second most important and interesting part of this play is this Act 4, that much of this singing, dancing, and poetry is couched by Kalidasa, not in Sanskrit, but in the colloquial Prakrit and colloquial languages, Prakrit and Apabhransha languages of the time. So it is as if he is singing, but he is singing now not only to people who would understand learned Sanskrit, but he is singing now to common people who are more familiar with the colloquial descriptions that he uses. So these are the two great and remarkable qualities of Act 4. It is something which you don't see very often in Sanskrit playwriting and literature. So this is what brought me really to this play. And as I said, the other great point is that here is a story which begins with love. And the love, it is not only a love between a human hero and a divine heroine, but the human hero also happens to have a wife. So where does she fit in? So Kalidasa deals with the king's wife. She also comes in the scene. She is first, put back by this. Then the king, the hero, seeks her forgiveness and her acceptance. And then in another act, finally, she accepts, so that when Pururavas and Urvashi have their own son, that son is asked first to greet and salute his senior mother. So, it brings the whole thing in this kind of conclusion. So you might say that Kalidasa is covering all aspects of social as well as emotional life. And it is very well done in this play. But in my opinion, Act 4 and the singing and the dancing in that Act 4 is really the most wonderful part.
Right. Ambassador Haksar, that's wonderful. And in fact, it reminds me also of the kind of devices that Shakespeare uses, because when he has his noble characters, they speak in blank verse. But when he has his other characters who are not so noble, they speak in prose. And not only that, colloquial prose as well. So it's a similar device which Kalidasa used much, much before the time of Shakespeare, 1,000 years before Shakespeare almost. Thank you very much indeed. I think we quickly need to get in your second question, Dr. Raghunathan. And then after that, I might pose a question as well to Ambassador Haksar, and we'll take up questions which are coming in from our viewers as well.
Well, actually, I'm very fortunate. My second question is found answer. I will just mention it after I read out a small translation. by Mr. Haksar and a comparative one from an older translation. The older translation reads, this is in Act 2. It reads, you may remove from the plants the flowery pollen produced by spring for scattering perfume. But why vainly rob me of those characters written through love by my beloved with her own hand? For surely you are known to have loved Anjana. Know that a love-afflicted person lives on such means intended to solace his heart. That's a complicated translation of a verse when the leaf on which the love letter is written has blown away with the wind. And the king laments that he's lost his most precious possession. So Mr. Haksar writes, O honored southern breeze, loved by spring, for its fragrance takes away the scented pollen of spring flowers. But why, for nothing, must you take what my love wrote with her own hand? You please your own dear Anjana, and know how a lover is sustained by such things to divert the mind. I think that's eloquent enough of how the translation is suited for the current times. And my question, which I had asked, which I had wanted to ask Mr. Haksar and had the answer myself, was how was he not daunted by previous translations? What the Kalidasa has been translated so many times by different people. How did he ever not feel inhibited or worried that should he attempt such a translation? I had the answer ready just in case. So now I read the answer first and I leave the question which has found its answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. If I may, I like to pose one small question to Ambassador Haksar myself, and that is that you have translated poems by Kalidasa earlier. You've also translated the plays of Bhasa in a much earlier book, which I remember very clearly, The Shattered Thigh and other plays. Is there a difference for you when you approach translation of poetry and translation of plays which are meant to be actually acted out or are theatrical works? Is there a difference in approach when you are translating these two different genres?
Well, thank you for asking a question which not only reflects upon Sanskrit literature, but it also reflects upon the history of my own relationship with it. I should tell you, in case you have not noticed this, that Bhasa is a playwright who lived much before Kalidasa. And it so happens that in one of his own plays, Kalidasa has praised Bhasa by name, saying that people say that there are other great poets like Bhasa, and who is going to take interest in a modern poet like Kalidasa. Then he gives his own explanation as to why he deserves to be noticed also. So you might say that Kalidasa was aware of Bhasa's writings. And so far as Bhasa is concerned, the plays which I translated, you would be interested to know that was my first translation from classical Sanskrit, which was published as the Penguin Classics. It was done, I think, just about 20 years ago, or a little more. So I was then, you might say, more of a beginner than I still am. And in translating Bhasa, I tried to convey his spirit. And his spirit was to produce in his plays, ultimately, action. And that action was conveyed through very concise dramatic descriptions very precise and concise poetic shlokas, and so on. And in fact, many critics have said that Bhasa is better watched in action, in drama, than read in writing. And you will be interested to know that Bhasa's plays are still a part of common, you might say, local acts and acting in Malayalam in Kerala to this day. So you might say that this is the kind of standing that Bhasa has. And by the time I came to Kalidasa, Sanskrit literature also had evolved, times had also changed, and Kalidasa brings to his writing a more expansive, more descriptive nature, not confined to conveying sharp conclusions, but to, you might say, telling things in a gentler, more progressive, and therefore more absorbing manner. So this is how I would compare Bhasa and Kalidasa. And of course, I should add that Bhasa and Kalidasa are not alone. There is a great deal more of Sanskrit thematic literature which deserves to be brought to the public notice today.
Can I ask
Thank
one
you.
small question,
Yes,
Sunny?
go ahead and ask your question, and then I'll come to an audience question.
I just want, yes, there is a question in the over here asked, but I'll just take 1 second. Ambassador
Please.
Haksar, what you said about Kerala is so moving. I really think that if this translation could be translated into Bengali, for instance, the objective is to make the young people of this country aware of their cultural and civilizational heritage and to get them interested in Sanskrit. And the other point I wanted to make was because, you know, as a Bengali, we are brought up on Vedic chanting for Durga Puja, especially, you know. I still know many of them by heart. I actually believe, this is just a comment, that chanting in Sanskrit is so much more powerful as an idiom than any other language. But the unfortunate part is that nobody has made an effort to make young people understand it. Otherwise, there is nothing more powerful than Vedic chanting, the way we were taught as small children by our parents. I'm a Bengali, so we do it for Durga Puja. We call it Mahalaya. For Mahalaya, we do the chanting. So I just wanted to once again thank you. I'm not a Sanskrit scholar like Dr. Raghunathan. I learned Sanskrit till class 10, but I really feel it's a very powerful idiom. And it would be wonderful if this translation of yours and other translations could be put into vernacular languages. Unfortunately, Amrendra is not there in ICCR anymore, but we could put it to ICCR and we could see if it could be disseminated in the vernacular. It would have a huge impact. Thank you so much, Sumit. Sorry to hog the show. And
No, not at all. Thank you very much for
May I,
that
may I
wonderful
make,
comment.
may I make a small comment?
Please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bhaswati. And knowing of your own literary competence and interests, may I suggest to you that you might make an attempt in translating my English Kalidasa into Bangla. Translations you will be interested to know that my last book, which came out just 2 months before, Vikramorvarshiyam, was a collection of love lyrics from the Amaru Shatakam. And that collection received a wonderful review, which was published, you'll be interested to know, in Bangladesh. So, Bangladesh media carrying the review of an English translation of our Sanskrit collection of love lyrics shows the underlying connectivity, and you might say even a thread of unity which runs across all cultures in this country. And translation is one way of making it better known.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Haksar. There is one question from the audience, but I think you've already more or less addressed it in your remarks, but I shall pose it nonetheless. And then after that, I'll request all our panelists to give a 1 or 2 minute roundup of their views in this particular session. So this question is from Ganga Kumar in Delhi for you, Mr. Haksar. What kind of message you want to give to society, especially the younger generation who don't understand Sanskrit mostly, through these translations of Kalidasa? So I think you've more or less addressed that question already, but still, in case you'd like to elaborate a little bit for the benefit of Ganga Kumar, please go ahead and do so very briefly, and then we'll come to the brief roundup remarks from all the panelists.
Well, I'll give you a brief answer to this question. My objective in these translations is firstly to try to revive interest in our ancient Sanskrit literature among modern readers, and especially among the younger generation of modern readers who have, for a variety of reasons, lost touch with the literature which their grandparents perhaps knew a little more about. Because Sanskrit is taught now, Sanskrit is very much a part of schooling in India, but it is taught now as an examination subject. And people choose to take Sanskrit in education and so on because it is possible at that kind of literal level to score very heavy marks in the subject, to get along in life in future studies. But the aspect of Sanskrit which I am trying to bring for people through translation is the literary aspect which deserves to be more known, more remembered today, because it reflects a certain unity and profundity in our cultural consciousness.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Haksar, for so succinctly stating your objectives in making these wonderful translations available to all of us.
Sumit,
Yes,
I have to
Bhasha,
leave at 5 o'clock sharp. Yeah.
Yes,
I just said I have to start
your roundup comments. Yes, please.
whenever it's convenient. Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, I really don't have much to say except to say that this translation, Ambassador Haksar, should be taken up by External Affairs Ministry and by the Association of Indian Diplomats, of which I was recently the president, to ensure its wide dissemination, particularly among neighboring countries, since you spoke about Jitu's translation, which came out in the Bangladeshi, very important Bangladeshi paper, but also among the Indologists, for instance, in the European Union, Germany, France, etc. And we also need in our own universities, Ambassador Haksar, and there you might like to think that in these foreign universities you have chairs for Sanskrit studies, classical Indian studies, etc. We need to do much more here so that we can take this forward. I will excuse myself in 2 minutes, Ambassador Haksar, because I have to join another show at 5 o'clock. Thank you very much, all of you, and thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Bharshadi. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. May I now go to Ambassador Khatua and request him for his concluding remarks on this webinar.
See, all our classics in any Indian language, including Sanskrit, needs to be translated and made widely available in India itself first. That is one. To that extent, Ambassador Haksar's translation serves a great purpose. And the book you love lyrics of Amaru Satakam accepted all over the world because that is fabulous. Very few in the world can write poems of love, longing, separation, love with melancholia than Amaru. That's why in Bangladesh it has so much. And they did not introduce me like I'm a small poet in Odia language. I have Academy Award, I have 40 books, and I will try to get a couple of your books, Kalidasa collections, translated into Odia. Thank you.
There were some problems with the sound while you were speaking, but we did get the gist of what you were saying. Thank you so much. And now, may I turn to Dr. Raghunathan and request your concluding comments as we're coming to the end of our time for this webinar.
Thank you. I think Mr. Haksar has to be thanked for two reasons. One, for bringing us a beautiful book by the name of Vikramorvarshiyam, and two, for giving us a book of Kalidasa, which is lesser known, less read, less appreciated. I, for one, appreciated Vikramorvarshiyam for the first time in your translation. Thank you very much. And I have read your Amaru Shatakam translation also, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raghunathan. I must say that's a big statement coming from you that you appreciated Vikramorvarshiyam properly for the first time in this translation. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm afraid we come to the end of this particular webinar. I have to thank IIC for organizing this wonderful occasion, and also thank our distinguished panelists, all of them, for taking part in it. Ambassador Bhashwati Mukherjee, who's just left us, Ambassador Katua, and you, Dr. Raghunathan. And most of all, let me thank Ambassador A.N.D. Haksar, who is such a stalwart, and he deserves a round of applause from all of us for the wonderful, sterling work that he is doing in translating and making available, making accessible the great classics of Sanskrit literature, many of which I know that, I mean, while Kalidasa is a well-known name, he has also brought forward so many classics which other people have not heard of, apart from Sanskrit scholars, and he's made them available in English translations as well. So this is wonderful work you're doing, and more power to your elbow, Ambassador Haksar. Please keep giving us these wonderful, wonderful excerpts and accessible excerpts of our great, great heritage. Thank you very much indeed, all of you.
Thank you.
Translation by Ambassador Haksar, because the lockdown has proved very beneficial for him, and he says that he has already been able to complete 2 translations during the lockdown. So, looking forward to the next discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to the chair.